these are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And though these are days of great trials, of famine and darkness and sword, still we are the voice in the desert, crying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun, at the trumpet call. So lift your voice, it's the year of Jubilee, and out of Zion's hill salvation comes.
Good morning. I would encourage everyone to open up in their Bibles to Luke, the 10th chapter. Luke chapter 10 is where we're going to be this morning. We're going to be in it quite a bit, so open up in your Bibles to that, and we will go through that pretty definitely this morning. I want to thank everybody for their presence this morning. I want to thank Dustin for an excellent job leading singing. When he told me what he was planning, I looked at the number of songs that were up there. I thought, well, I'm going to have to take my normally 65, 70-minute sermon and compress it down to a more reasonable time period, 30, 35 minutes, something like that. But the way that he constructed it, I thought went very well. I liked the flow. I liked what he did. I liked how he kept our minds engaged. He's not the first person to kind of switch it up a little bit. We've seen, I can think of several times where Nathan, Joe, and Ray of other people have kind of switched things up every once in a while to kind of keep it fresh for us, to keep our minds focused on what we're doing. And I appreciate what he did. I appreciate the interest. I appreciate the enthusiasm for that this morning. I thought the song service was especially well done this morning. There's a story about a aid station that was near a coastline for many years. And this aid station was world renowned for being one of the most aggressive aid stations in the area. It was the only aid station in that one specific region. But it was known as being one of the most aggressive in the area. It was the one that would launch out in the deep when everybody thought that nobody could reach sailors that had capsized or boats that had flipped upside down. Though most situations people thought it was not going to go well, this was the aid station that would reach out for them. And over time, what eventually happened was there were people that would try to submit supplies. Everybody kind of wanted to be a part of that aid station. And so people donated supplies to that station. People volunteered hours, people volunteered time. And over the course of the year, a few years, it eventually turned from this aid station to nothing really more than this kind of club that people used to hang out with. People weren't going out and venturing into the deep to try and rescue people anymore. People kind of showed up and they thought, well, we're just going to kind of hang out for a while. And then when distress signals would come in, they weren't quite given the consideration they normally deserved. And eventually this reached a schism within the aid station. People thought, well, we have a lot of fun here, we love what we're doing here, and so we can't really venture out, we can't fulfill the purpose for the aid station anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this kind of the gathering place for everybody. We're going to build another aid station down the coastline a little bit. So that place eventually kind of became this little club where everybody kind of hung out with. They built another aid station. That aid station began to grow in prominence. They were the ones that would venture out into the deep. They were the ones that would rescue capsized sailors. Until eventually people started donating supplies to them. And people started hanging out at their place. And people started kind of venturing there. And they thought to themselves, well, we can't be an aid station anymore. We're just kind of have to be this club. So we'll build another aid station further down the coast. In the course of about 30, 40, 50 years, you would see over a period of time aid stations pop up that would fulfill this amazing role, and then they would kind of shrink back a little bit. Another aid station would pop up, fulfill this amazing role, and kind of shrink back a little bit. To this day, if you were to go to this coastline, you would see dozens of aid stations dotted along that coastline, and not one of them are actually engaged in the act of saving people. When we gather together at the church, and when Jesus said, I shall build my church, He built it, ladies and gentlemen, for a specific purpose. Not as a social club, not as this place where we can all kind of hang out on the weekends, not as this place where we can tell funny stories, but as a place that is geared towards saving souls. Anyone ask me what the main reason against having this idea of a social gospel, where we try to go out and cure all the social ills of today's world? The reason that we don't do that is because it distorts the original purpose of what the church was built for, which was to save souls. And too often times, over the course of too many churches' lives, people begin to shrink inwards. And instead of becoming fishers of men, as we should be, too many times we become, as one person put it, keepers of the aquarium. And instead of going out and saving souls and fishing men, instead we become more introverted. And we distort the original mission of the church from going out and trying to actively save people to becoming more inward, where we just hang out with ourselves, and if we convert somebody, that's great, but that's not really what we're supposed to, at least on the surface, think about doing. The church was built to save souls. The church was built to stretch out to other people and to try and convert others. That's why Matthew chapter 28, that's commonly called the Great Commandment, or the Great Commission, not the Great Suggestion. Evangelism gets a back burner. It's oftentimes retroactive to the back burner where people don't really pay that much attention to it. But we have that there. If you can do it, that's great. But that's not really what we're about. The church should always be about and should always put in its main focus the purpose of saving souls. In Luke the 10th chapter, Jesus addresses this very honestly. If you were to look in Luke chapter 10, he addresses all these people. There's several people, hundreds of people following him. He picks 70 of them out. And there's no real guideline to the selection process. He doesn't say, I'm going to select 70 of the most handsome, of which case Joe obviously would have been in that one. He doesn't say, I'm going to pick the smartest. He doesn't say, I'm going to pick the most athletic. He picks 70 people. And he says, I'm going to take those 70 people, I'm going to send them out in pairs ahead of me so they can prepare the path for when I go to their towns. Jesus would oftentimes approach the town. He expected people to be there. And the way that they were kind of geared up towards Jesus' arrival was having people or heralds ahead of him in order to have that. But even if Jesus couldn't reach those towns, it was pivotal for people to be there to preach the gospel regardless. And in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 3, he gives several instructions. Look at this starting in verse 3. He says, go. That's the very first commandment. That's the most important one. He says, go. Behold, I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no money belt, no bag, no shoes. Greet no one on the way. Whatever house you enter, forsake peace to this house. If a man of peace is there your peace will rest on him. But if not, it will return back to you. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give to you, for the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not keep moving from house to house. For whatever city you enter and they receive you, eat what is set before you. And heal those who are sick, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near you. And Luke the 10th chapter, in verses 3 through 9, what Jesus does very simply is outline the instructions for evangelism. Oftentimes we wonder to ourselves, how can I go and evangelize the world? Here's an excellent idea. Here are some guidelines that Jesus gives right here in verses 3 through 9 of how we can go about saving souls. And it should be no surprise that the very first thing he says, very simply, is go. Nobody is going to be saved unless people get off their couches and go out there into the world and actively try to save souls. And Jesus knew that. Jesus understood that the reason these people needed, or the fact that these people were going to be saved, is by people actually teaching them. Romans 10 begins with this. He says, how are they going to hear? How can people be converted? How can people understand the gospel if nobody is sent? And so very simply what he mentions there in Luke chapter 10 verse 3 is go. But he doesn't just say go. Even though he tells them and sends them off in twos, obviously for a sense of support, probably a few other reasons, he also says, I want you to believe in me. He says, take no sandals, no staff, no money belt. Don't take these other things. And that's not because he just wanted the trip to be that much more uncomfortable for him. That's not what the purpose was. The reason that Jesus said that in Luke chapter 10, verse 4, is because I want you to focus on me. I'm going to provide for you. I sent you, and I am going to help you. He also mentions immediately after that you need to be going in peace. In today's world, you have the gospel where you have different religions being advocated by various means. You have some people giving money. If you join my club, if you join my religion, you'll have all your wildest dreams will come true. That's Joel Osteen's favorite technique. Other people will say, well, if you don't convert to me, I'm going to kill you. You can look at several world religions that teach that type of thing. But what Jesus mentions here in Luke chapter 10 is, I want you to go in peace, even if you are rejected. Go in peace. And this would be especially apropos for somebody like Peter, who several chapters in the future sees Jesus being arrested by all these temple guards. And what does he do? Pulls out a sword that's probably 12 to 16 inches in length and slices off Malchus's ear. And it's on the ground, and Jesus picks it up, heals him, and then turns and rebukes Peter, saying the famous phrase, those who live by the sword will also die by the sword. The way that Jesus wants the gospel to be advanced, the way that it should be advanced, is through peace. He also mentioned to them, I want you to commune with these people. These are not people that you're going to go into a town and you're going to sit in this 4-star luxury hotel and you're going to preach to them from the terrace on your balcony that you paid $3,000 a night for. You are going to go and you are going to be with the people. And these will be people that you had never met before. These will be people that you don't know anything about them. 10 minutes before you walk through the town, you had no clue what their mind was or who they were. But I want you to live with them. I want you to be part of them. I want you to commune with those people and be one with them. He also said, lastly, I don't want you to help those people. I don't want you to just go in and preach the gospel to them, but where you personally are able to, I want you to help those people. I want you to demonstrate the gospel through your good works, through your charity, through your kindness, so that the gospel is not just simply preached through words, but it is preached through action. I want you to be there with those people. After he lays out these instructions, after he tells them the nuts and the bolts of what to do, then he gives them something else. Starting in verse 10 of Luke chapter 10, he tells them very pointedly what they could expect. In Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 10, he says, whatever city you enter and they do not receive you, go out into its streets and say, even the dust of your city which clings to our feet, we will wipe off and protest against you. In other words, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'm not even take the dust of your town with me as I move forward. He says, yet be sure of this, that the kingdom of God has come near. I did my job. Verse 12, I say to you, it will be more tolerable in that day for Sodom than for that city. And as Jesus kind of goes inward, he then reflects back on his own experience, I think, and says in verse 13, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the miracles had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, which had occurred to you, they would have repented long ago, sitting in sackcloth and ashes. But it will be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon the judgment than for you. You can look in Isaiah to see the judgments against Tyre and Sidon. Verse 15, you, Capernaum, you're not left out. You will not be exalted to heaven, will you? For you will be brought down to Hades. Listen to this, verse 16. Here's the crux of this entire section. The one who listens to you listens to me, and the one who rejects you has rejected me, and he who rejects me rejects the one who sent me. What you notice within Jesus' statement there, especially in verse 16, is the chain of command. It's very easy for someone to say, well, I'm going to go into the city and I'm going to preach the gospel. If I get rejected, I take that personally. And I understand how that feels whenever somebody rejects the gospel and you take that personally. But what Jesus wants them to remember is that's not the be-all and end-all of the whole situation. Because if they reject you, they reject Jesus. And if they've rejected Jesus, they've rejected God. They rejected the Father. That's what Jesus wants them to understand. What these people are doing when they go into these cities and when they open up the Bible, not open up the Bible, when they open up the bread of life, that was what I wanted to say, when they open up the bread of life and they begin to preach the gospel to these people, everything about what they're saying, everything about what they're communicating, everything about what they're challenging these people is against the status quo of what they have in their own lives. These people have operated through a system of religion for years, decades even sometimes. And to up and say that is no longer valid, now this is valid, you're no longer changing their religion. Now you're changing the very essence of who they are. You're changing their value system. You're changing their goals. You're changing their pursuits. You're changing everything about who they are or challenging them to. And people are going to kick back against this. People are not going to be happy in that day and age, and people are not going to be happy in this day and age because half the time, sometimes we exist on spiritual autopilot. I'm just kind of here, I'm just kind of there, and if anybody comes and preaches something differently, then I kick back against it because it's not really that comfortable to me. And so what Jesus says here in Luke chapter 10 is you can expect rejection wherever you go, an overwhelming amount of rejection. But listen to what he says in the end part of this. Starting in verse 17 of Luke chapter 10, notice what he says in this. He says, the 70 then returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, this is where it's seemingly random that Jesus just kind of looks off to the side. He said, I said to them, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And behold, I gave you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. He notices that even though these people faced overwhelming rejection, he saw the power of Satan being diminished literally before his own eyes. In verse 21, he continues on. He says, at that very time, he rejoiced greatly in the Holy Spirit and said to them, I praise you, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was very well pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Turning to the disciples, verse 23, he said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things you see. For I say to you that many prophets and kings wished to see the things which you see, and did not see them, and to hear the things which you hear, and did not hear them. Every time I read Luke chapter 10 and verse 24, I get a tinge of jealousy in my heart. Because what these people were gearing up for, what they were seeing in that moment, was something that 99.99 billion other 9% would never experience. And that's the work of the Messiah in action. When you read the Psalms, and you see David's attraction to the Messiah, and how he looks forward to the time of the Messiah. Or when you hear about Abraham receiving the promises that are 2,000 years in the future, you can almost feel the anticipation of those people that want nothing more, anything in their life, than to be living in the time period of the Messiah. And every Christian in today's world looks at that time period the exact same way. If I could just hear Jesus, if I could just see him, what a treat that would be. And what a blessing that would be. And what Jesus reminds these people here in Luke chapter 10, verses 17 through 24 is, you are living in the most important time period in history. Because you personally, 70, have been sent out by me to preach the gospel. You've experienced roaring success. And you get to have a part in the hand-in-hand advancement of the gospel. And I read that and I get jealous. Because I also want to have that same hand-in-hand attachment to the gospel. And then you realize in 2017 that we actually do. That even though we're not living in the same time period of Jesus, that even though we can't put our fingers into his hand and feel the nail scars, even though we don't get to hear Jesus' voice, even though we don't get to see Jesus do miracles, that we are also living in a very special and a very blessed time. And I would challenge all of us that we need to keep that in mind. That we need to remember how special this is. That when we talk about evangelism, we're not talking about a quota sheet that we just kind of move forward and we just check these things off our box and then we go eat Taco Bell. Maybe that's just me. But that we actually have a part in something that is cosmic shape. And that's something that we need to have a heart for. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Those of you who were in the class this morning noticed that we talked about the next quarter class, and we talked about what we're going to be discussing next quarter. And what we're going to be discussing on Wednesday night is a class that I'm really excited about, / very nervous about, because I just think it's going to go very awesome. At the same time, there's obviously a lot of pitfalls when we talk about this, but it's a Q&A session. Not live Q&A, so those of you who didn't get your questions in, tough cookies for you, but we're discussing a whole lot of questions. And as we discussed several things, as people brought in questions, number one, I was surprised by who gave what questions, because you would think this person thought, they've never thought about that. They asked the question straight out of left field. So there's a whole bunch of random questions from all over the place that I'm very excited about talking about. There's also a lot of very foundational questions. And one of the questions that came in was the simple question, how can I teach other people about the gospel? And I'll admit, in the shade of the other questions I received, when we're talking about the legalization of marijuana, when we talk about whether or not the founding fathers were guilty of Romans chapter 13, we talk about all these other questions that are very abstract in nature. A question, something like, how can I share the gospel with others, seems very simple. And I sat there at my computer and I counted out 400 words 18 times. Because it was deceptively the hardest question on the list. Because you think to yourself, well, this is how you teach the gospel to other people. This is how you preach the gospel to other people. This is how you share the gospel with others. And what I kept coming back to was the theoretical versus the actual. It's very simple, ladies and gentlemen, to simply have this list of go. And just go. Just go do it. It is vastly different when you actually put those things into practice. And this question above all is the one that I'm most looking forward to talking about because it's so varied in its response. And people can say, well, this worked for me, I talked to this person, that worked for me, and we can just share responses. But the more I thought about that in context of this verse, the more I realized that what Jesus told these people in Luke chapter 10 wind up not only in that day, but perfectly applied to today's world as well. Because when you think about evangelism in its modern day context, the exact same rules apply. Number one, we have to go. We have to get up off our couches. We have to get out of our comfort zone. We have to breach uncomfortable parts of conversation. And we simply just have to tell them. Now it's easy for me to say that. It's very easy for me to get up in a room full of Christians and say, we just need to go. But it's totally different on Tuesday morning where you're sitting at the coffee pot in the lounge with the other guy. You're talking about how the Cowboys lost again, which they probably won't, but how they lost again. You think to yourself, I'm talking about the gospel. And that's a totally different mindset than in here talking about rousing success. Yeah, let's go talk to people about the gospel. It's totally different than that time period. But what Jesus understood about these 70 was the exact same thing that we understand, that it takes courage. And to do that, he didn't send them out one by one. He sent them out in twos. When you look at Ecclesiastes, the wisdom of this idea comes forth in full force. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Starting in verse 9. Once I reach Ecclesiastes 4, I will read it for everybody. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Listen to what the wise man says in this passage. He says, 2 are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift his companion up. But woe to the one who falls down when there is not another to lift him up. Furthermore, if two lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? And if one can overpower him, who is alone? Two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands, that kind of bringing this to its full conclusion, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. What Solomon understood by talking about this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 is that indefinitely, without fail, every single instance, 2 are always better than 1. And sometimes, for whatever reason, whenever we approach life, whether we're talking about evangelism or whether we're talking about something else, we always have an arrogant heart in our mind to think to ourselves that I can go it alone. That I can do whatever I want to because I am awesome. And what this passage misses in 2 contexts is, number 1, the pride factor of sometimes thinking higher of ourselves than we should. Number 2, the accountability factor. Because oftentimes we're scared to ask other people to help us because now we actually have to. If I were to walk up to Howard and say, Howard, at this Bible study with me on Thursday, I'd love it if you showed up, which would be a fantastic asset, by the way, so that may very well may come. But if I were to walk up to Howard and I say, Howard, I really want to talk to this guy about the gospel. Will you help me? Guess what now is in play? Accountability. Now I have to do it. Because Howard's holding me accountable. But just as Howard is holding me accountable, I will bet you anything in the world that when Thursday rolls around, Howard will help me through that. We don't ask other people for help for 2 reasons. Pride's the first one. The second one, oftentimes we don't want to be accountable for this. We'd rather think about it. We'd rather talk about it in theoretical terms instead of actually getting out there. And so when Jesus says in Luke chapter 10, when he simply says go, he gives them 2 people, one to help. The second reason is to hold them accountable. He also asks them, and he asks us for the exact same reason. Simply believe. Look in Judges, the 6th chapter. I know that says Judges 4. Look in Judges 6. Judges chapter 6. This is another question that we're actually going to discuss in the Q&A section next quarter. Judges chapter 6 oftentimes is an interesting study because the study of Gideon is hard to put together. Gideon seems courageous, but sometimes he seems cowardly. And when you look at this very early phase of Gideon's life, before he does the 300 people where he attacks the Midianites, all that different stuff, Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 36 happens. You can see that he has some courage because of what he's just done, but now God is asking him to do something greater. And in Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 36, says, Gideon said to God, if you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken, behold, I will put a fleece of wool in the threshing floor. This is Gideon asking God, if there is dew on the fleece only, and it is drawn on the ground, then I will know that you will deliver Israel through me as you have spoken. What Gideon is doing is asking for proof. I don't want to overlook that. What Gideon is doing here in this situation is, I'm going to put a piece of fleece on the ground, and if that's wet and everything else is dry, then I will know that what you've told me to do is accurate. Verse 38 was so. When he arose early the next morning, squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece of all full water. Gideon then said, verse 39, asking for double confirmation, he said to God, do not let your anger burn against me, that I may speak once more. Please let me make a test once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew on all the ground. Now I'm going to do a second test. Gideon says, I'm going to put the fleece down, and I want it to be dry and everything else around it to be wet. And if that happens, then I will know that you've spoken to me. Verse 40, God did so on that night, for it was dry only on the fleece, and dew was on all the ground. We close that chapter up, and we immediately look at Gideon with judgment in our hearts, and we think, I cannot believe how much of a lack of faith he had. God spoke to him. Why couldn't he just believe this? The difference with Gideon is not that he asked for verification. That's not the point. The difference is, when he asked for verification and he got it, he acted on it. Because just as Judges chapter 6 closes with this verification, look at how Judges chapter 7 opens. Verse 1, Jeroboam, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod. I want you to get in your mind what Gideon's doing in this chapter. Gideon is not going off on this grand quest to receive the ring from Mordor so he can then walk across the road and throw it in the tent. I know that's a gross oversimplification of the Hobbit, but you get the idea. He's not doing something like that. He is taking 300 men against one of the strongest armies in the world at that point. Yes, he asked for verification. You know what he did after that? After he got it, he got up and went. We're so quick to denounce people like Peter, who looks at Jesus as he walks to him on the sea. And he sees the ghost, and all the people are scared and terrified. But Peter looked at him. And instead of being like the other apostles and just kind of accepting the fact that Jesus is walking out to them, you always have to give credit. Even though Peter's saying, you have to give credit to Peter for getting out of the boat in the first place. Too oftentimes, ladies and gentlemen, we are so scared to go because we don't really believe that God will be with us. We know, we hear about it, we think about it, people tell us that all day long, but we don't really believe it. We don't really believe that what God has told us to do, He will also help us accomplish. And in that regard, what Jesus told the disciples in Luke the 10th chapter is the exact same thing that He asks us to do today. We also need to, ladies and gentlemen, go in peace. Luke chapter 9, the chapter right before 10 opens. This is literally the verses immediately preceding the instructions that were led off with this morning. And in Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 51, which comes on the heels of an amazingly simple and sinful conversation by the disciples about who's arguing about who's the greatest. Verse 51, you see this lack of priorities and this lack of understanding about the mission right in full view. In Luke chapter 9, starting verse 51, it says, when the days were approaching for His ascension, which is an interesting way that Luke phrases that. That's for a purpose, what I'm talking about right now. He was determined to go to Jerusalem. And He sent messengers on ahead of Him, and they went and entered the village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for Him. Now that audience is important, because what He's addressing there in Luke chapter 9, verse 52, are Samaritans, people that everybody hates, if you are a Jew. Verse 53, but they did not receive Him. There's a big shocker, because He was traveling toward Jerusalem. Completely different religious ideologies. Verse 54, when His disciples, James and John, the sons of thunder, saw this, they said, Lord, you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them. And I love, by the way, if we take a pause, I love how that's just a natural reaction to them. I love how when these people are rejected, whenever, I actually don't love it because it's extremely violent, but I love it in the ironic sense. I love how when these people are rejecting Jesus, their first response is, let's just call fire from heaven down to kill them all. As if that's just business as usual. And yet Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 53, or verse 54 rather, after that, verse 55, He turned, being Jesus, and rebuked them and said, you do not know what kind of spirit you are, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. The ultimate goal for all of us, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring everybody to an understanding of God, an obedient understanding of God. And that's not going to be accomplished by holding a gun to people's heads and forcing them to obey. I think too often times whenever we go to people with the gospel, for whatever reason, we expect it to be a fight. We expect that when we talk to other people about the gospel, when we talk to them about baptism, about prayer, about obedience, when we talk to them about it, we go into that conversation expecting to get punched in the face. And when it doesn't happen, it's just a pleasant surprise. Instead of that attitude, and instead of believing that we go into the gospel in a fight, now sometimes it may be, go in peace. There is not a more joyous message on this earth than delivering news to somebody that will save their eternal soul. And instead of entering into every evangelistic conversation believing that it's going to be a fight, that we're going to lose friendships, that we're going to lose our job, go into it expecting this to happen. And you know what? It may just be. We need to go in peace towards other people, but we also need to commune with them. Listen to this. You cannot teach, ladies and gentlemen, where you do not dwell. You cannot teach people if you don't dwell with them, if you don't understand it, if you don't a part of them. I don't condone every part of this movie. One of my favorite movies is the movie Batman Begins. I expect a rousing cheer from Nick because he loves DC, also loves Marvel. There's a little bit of a contrast there. But one of my favorite movies is Batman Begins. And there's a scene in that movie. Like I said, I don't condone every aspect of it. But there's a scene in that movie where Bruce Wayne takes off his coat, gives it to a homeless man, takes his cash, gives that to another homeless man, and then dumps all of his belongings in the fire and lives like a fugitive, lives like a criminal. Now, what I do not condone in any aspect of this is living like a criminal. But the reason that Batman did this, if you can level with me on a very ultra-serious level, the reason he did this was to understand the criminal mind so that he could better combat them in a very much more serious level. That's what we're asked to do as Christians. Not to go live sinful lives, not to go live in the depths of depravity and reach the very base of sinfulness, but to at least understand it. And it should tell us something that when Jesus went to people, he didn't stay only in the synagogues, preaching at the top of his lungs, telling people how to live. He actually went into Pharisees' houses and dined with them. that he looked at Nicodemus, who was a sinner, allegedly, and called him to come down. Now there's a big difference in what I'm talking about. Jesus did not live a life of sin. He did not go sin willfully so that he could understand them. But he did seek to know them. He seek to associate with them on their level. And we have to do that in our own lives. We can't have some highfalutin understanding of the gospel that whenever somebody talks to us about the gospel, we insist on using no less than 6 syllables with every word. We have to get on their level. We have to understand God as they know it. And that's when we can begin to convert them. I think we also have to help them. As Jesus is teaching disciples in John chapter 13, this grand upper room scene, he mentions in John chapter 13, verse 35, one of the most simple explanations. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. This is something we've seen over and over again on numerous occasions within the last few weeks. As Hurricane Harvey ravaged all of the Gulf Coast and left so many of our Christian brothers in shambles and left them just completely desolate. And if there's any bright spot out of all of this, if there's any bright spot out of the lives that were lost, the homes that were destroyed, if there's any glimmering sense of hope out of this, it's the fact that at least in my lifetime, maybe I don't get on Facebook enough, which sounds like an oxymoron, but if there's any silver lining, it's the fact that more than any other time in my life, I have seen such an outpouring of Christians helping the people who are down there. Christians helping Christians. And you know what? The world sees that. The world sees what we do for each other. The world sees what we do for other people as individual Christians. And they marvel at that. Because you can never conceptualize in your mind how somebody would just willingly, and I've heard of this happening, would just willingly sign over a $20,000 check to somebody that they've never met before. But they know has just lost everything in a hurricane. That's love, ladies and gentlemen. And when Jesus is telling them here in John chapter 13, verse 35, he's not saying just go and teach them and beat them over the head with stuff. You get down on their level and you help them. And you bring the gospel to them as a servant should. We can also, ladies and gentlemen, expect rejection. Move a couple chapters later to Luke 15. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 8. Jesus tells a parable that I think is very instructive of this. Luke chapter 15, starting verse 8, he says, "What woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses 1 coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost.' And in the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Now I know what you're doing. You're looking at me and you're thinking to yourself, these verses have nothing to do with rejection. I beg to disagree. Because the only thing that when we talk about this, we put it in the context of evangelism, the only reason this woman is rejoicing is because she lost in the first place. That sounds weird. But over and over again when we go out and tell people about the gospel, we will experience rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection. Let me ask you a question. If you've been rejected 99 times, why do you go after them? Because you and I know that finally getting that 100th person to say yes, to study with you, hopefully be converted, makes up for all of the other failures, all of the other heartbreaks, and all of the other sadness put together. It hurts when somebody says no to the gospel. It hurts when people look at us in the eye and say, "I will not obey God, I will not listen to you anymore," and you can fill in the blank after that. When that person says yes, and that person humbly accepts God, makes the confession, is baptized for the remission of their sins, there is no sweeter treasure. Yes, we will experience rejection on a very, very, very regular basis. But the thing that makes it worth it is the joy that we find at the end, which is mentioned right at the end. Even if we go through our whole life and we talk to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, we understand that at the end of our life, if we can just bring one person, or if we can at least look at God and say, "I tried," it'll all be worth it. In Galatians chapter 6, I want you to look over at that. Paul had a lot to say to this church, or to this series of churches, but more of a region. But in Galatians chapter 6, he gives a very simple, a very basic, and a very earnest plea to these people. In Galatians chapter 6, he talks, number one, about the community that we all experience with the gospel. That I may preach to somebody for years, and it won't until Howard shows up 20 years later, all of a sudden they want to be baptized. Howard takes all the credit for it. What he addresses in Galatians chapter 6 is the community that we all experience with everybody the gospel. So look what he mentions to us. Galatians chapter 6, starting verse 6, it says, the one who is taught the word is to share all good things with the one who teaches him. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever man sows, this he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us, and this, you highlight or underline this, let us not lose heart in doing good. For in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. Now what I don't want you to take away from this verse, what he's saying there in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 is that if you talk to enough people, you will ironclad every single time have somebody that obeys the gospel. That doesn't happen for everybody. Noah preached the gospel, or Noah preached the message of the ark for 100 years from what we can tell, and not one person got on that boat except for his family. And we don't even know if they wanted to be there. But not a person in this room would look at Noah and say that he was his own. And we look at somebody like Paul, who preached the gospel for years, for decades even, and had numerous people obey the gospel. Look at him as a roaring success. The reality, those two people are not that different. You may teach the gospel to one person, or to hundreds of people, or to thousands of people for years, and not have one positive response. But let me tell you something right now. Your work is not there. And when Paul mentions this in Galatians chapter 6, especially there in verses 6 through 9, I do not want you to lose heart in doing good, for you will reap in due time. That may not be baptisms, it may not even be positive responses. But what God counts more than anything else is our effort to go out and try and teach people, and try to bring people to Christ. That may never result in a visible conversion, but it will result in satisfaction and obedience to God. One of my favorite stories, I've literally been waiting 8 years to bring the story up. One of my favorite stories is about a man named Larry Walters. He was 33 years old. And Larry Walters in 1964 decided one day that he was tired of seeing his neighborhood from the average vantage point. And so what Larry Walters did was he took a lawn chair, he took a BB rifle, and he took a cooler full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and then he strapped 400 helium balloons to his chair, expecting to rise about 100 feet off the ground. Larry Walters eventually got to 100 feet, then he got to 500 feet, then he got to 5,000 feet, and eventually he maxed out at 11,000 feet when he ventured into the LAX airport and air traffic had to stop from all corners of the United States because he was literally in international airspace. And they had to close everything down, eventually got the balloons down, he eventually came down, he's sitting there in his lawn chair in the middle of the tarmac, and the people walked up to Larry Walters and they asked him 3 questions. Number 1, did you have fun? He said yes. Number 2, will you do it again? No. Number 3, why'd you do it in the first place? His response is sometimes you just have to get out and do something. Sometimes you just have to get out there. Now, of all the excuses, of all the reasons, and all the possibilities, that ranks like number 478 on my possible reasons that I would tell a cop that I'm about to go to jail for forever with. But it paints a fundamental truth, doesn't it? That at some point you can't just sit in your lawn chair. Sometimes you need to strap 400 balloons to it and send 11,000 feet and just go look at the neighborhood. You can't just exist in the status quo that we've existed for. Sometimes, at some point, we will need to branch out of our comfort zone. We will need to put ourselves out. Take a risk. Experience the world through the eyes of evangelism. And that's when we'll begin to see the world less as a bunch of people that are just arguing about a bunch of different things on Facebook. And a world full of lost souls that desperately need the gospel. If you're here this morning for some reason you're apart from God, my plea to you is don't wait 1 second longer. Don't wait any second longer to put off obeying the gospel. Or if you're here this morning, you're wayward. Maybe you're 11,000 feet away from where you should be. People are shutting down traffic for you. You're so far apart from God that He doesn't even recognize you, and you don't recognize Him anymore. Or anywhere in between. Maybe you need to come back to Him. You need to turn your heart back to Him. And you need, as the 70 did, somebody else to help. We stand here ready. 85 other people stand here ready to help you, be with you, be with you every day. I urge you to do it to make the call relationship good now as we stand as we stand.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And though these are days of great trials, of famine and darkness and sword, still we are the voice in the desert, crying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun, at the trumpet call. So lift your voice, it's a year of Jubilee, and out of Zion's hill salvation comes.